For more than a century, the natural beauty of Northern California's wine country has attracted people from across the globe. As the region developed, towns and businesses sprang up, roadhouses, mills, grand mansions, and of course, wineries. But amongst the hardworking residents who made their homes here lurked a seedy and dangerous element. Gamblers, thieves, prostitutes, and killers, even pirates. Death and ruin often traveled with them, and long after they committed their untoward deeds, the spirits of many of them remain here, roaming the hillsides, frightening current residents and turning this otherwise serene area into haunted wine country. To tell the tales, we've enlisted a number of paranormal experts like myself. Authors, historians, ghost hunters, and gifted psychics serve as our ghostly guides. Some use the aid of equipment, like recording devices and electromagnetic field detectors, or K2 meters, to capture sounds and images. Feeling a little curious? Well, come on. But remember what they say about curiosity. It killed the cat. With over 250 wineries in Napa Valley, lush vineyards are everywhere you look. But some of these rolling acres harbor more than grapevines. Jeff Dwyer is an experienced paranormal investigator and the author of several books based on his extensive research. He'll show us Frog's Leap Winery with one of the few remaining wooden barns from the 19th century. Christian and Elizabeth Adamson built that barn in 1884, and the ghost of Elizabeth Adamson is seen there to this day. But first, Jeff checks in at a former hotel once filled with nefarious patrons, a riverfront mill with resident ghosts, and the scene of a wanton crime so vicious its imprint remains on the town and the mansion where it occurred more than 120 years ago.
In 1880, Captain John Greenwood and his wife Lucina moved up here from the Bay Area and bought all of this acreage. They established this grand mansion at the gateway to the Napa Valley and built several orchards and vegetable gardens surrounding it. Lucina was quite a gardener, and she supplied her neighbors with vegetables and fruit. On the evening of February 9, 1891, the captain was mending a fence when two men approached. There was something odd about their behavior, so when they asked for food, he turned them away, which was against his usual good nature. The men returned a few minutes later and accosted the captain and dragged him into the kitchen, where they tied him up to a chair and drugged him and beat him. While they were ransacking the kitchen, Lucina came across this porch, entered to find the two men there. They immediately took her upstairs, tied her to the bed, beat her, and continued looking through the house for valuables. Before they left the second floor, they shot her. When they returned to the kitchen, they found the captain still unconscious, so they left the house, headed up the Napa Valley for drinks. The first time I entered the Greenwood mansion, I was alone on the second floor hallway, and I noticed a pale apparition enter the hallway from the doorway behind me. She walked down this hallway and entered that bedroom over there. The apparition was transparent, and it seemed she was wearing a blue dress, possibly with an apron. Her gray hair was tied back in a bun. On other visits, I didn't see this apparition, but I did sense a female presence in the house. Other psychics and paranormal investigators who have entered the house have detected a female presence and sometimes encountered this spirit. After the captain was released from the hospital, he returned home grieving for Lucina. He was so overcome by the tragedy that he had her buggy disassembled, moved into this room, and reassembled. Lucina always loved this buggy. She drove it all over this part of the Napa Valley, visiting friends and neighbors. And the captain cherished the buggy as well. So he had it placed in this room, and he slept in the buggy or next to it every night of his life for his remaining 10 years before he died. This is the Greenwood Monument here in Tuluque Cemetery in Napa. Here lies Lucina, who died in 1891. John suffered many years from his emotional and physical wounds, but he joined her in the spirit world in 1912, and he lies here. This historic building houses the popular Villa Romana restaurant at the gateway to the Napa Valley on Highway 29. In 1855, it was built by Elijah and Elizabeth True as an inn serving travelers coming from Sacramento, the Central Valley, and the Gold Rush country. It became a very important transportation hub as travelers would wait here for a day or two for trips across the Napa River on the ferry boat so they could get to Sonoma and Santa Rosa. And because many of these travelers were carrying gold and other valuables, this place also attracted criminals, whiskey salesmen, gamblers, and prostitutes. And it is said on the second floor there was quite a brothel in operation here from about 1860 to about 1890. It's unknown how many people died in this building, but certainly there were a lot of things that went on here that have created many ghosts that roam the second floor and the balcony. Many of us believe these are the ghosts of the gamblers, whiskey salesmen, and others who still frequent this place. Late at night, when staff members have turned off the lights and shut the door, come out to the parking lot, they've turned to see the lights on the second floor still on and strange shadows walking back and forth across the windows. These may be the ghosts of gamblers and others still having parties on the second floor. In 1884, Alfred Hatt Sr. arrived here and bought 3 acres of riverfront land right behind me for only $1. He and his wife Alma established the Napa Mills in this grand brick building you see. For many years the mill was very profitable, but during that time Alma and Alfred suffered a number of tragedies. 4 of their 6 children never reached their 20th birthday. Finally, in 1898, Alfred suffered the ultimate tragedy when Alma died of pneumonia. This sent him into a spiral of depression from which he never recovered. He died in 1913, but in 1900, he realized he couldn't handle the business anymore, so he turned it over to his son, Alfred Hatt Jr. Currently, the building that was the Napa Mill houses the Napa River Inn. The second floor is haunted by a female ghost who walks around wearing a white dress. She hums and sings, and the odor of her perfume is often noticed by hotel staff and guests. One guest reported that after putting her clothing into a dresser drawer and closing it, the dresser drawer came open again, and this happened for 3 days repeatedly. The ghost of Robert Krieg is also seen here. Now, Robert took over in 1912 from Alfred Hatt Jr. Robert Krieg has walked around creating the sound of heavy boot steps on the floor, but sometimes he appears as a completely lifelike apparition, so much so that tourists have walked up to him and asked him questions. Intrigued by his clothing and his manner, when they turn to see him walk away, he simply vanishes. But he is still on duty here, looking after the men who worked for him in the Napa River Mills. When Alfred Hatt Jr. took over the business in 1900, he had 5 children and a wife to care for, and mounting business challenges from competitors and lawsuits over operation of his steamboat. In 1906, his wife Margaret died, leaving him in a very difficult situation. Somehow he kept the business going for another 6 years, but on April Fool's Day, 1912, he walked into the place that is now occupied by Sweetie Pie's Bakery, threw a rope over a ceiling beam, and hung himself. To this day, his ghost is sometimes seen hanging from that beam. The ceiling is now covered with sheetrock, but from time to time, sensitive visitors see that body hanging from the rope. I'm here at Frog's Leap Winery on Concrete in the Upper Napa Valley. This winery was established in 1878 by Christian Adamson. In that same year, 19-year-old Elizabeth Mills moved to the valley and married Christian. Despite their age difference, they had a number of good years together, building this barn in 1884. They also gave birth to 2 boys. But a third pregnancy went bad, and when it ended in tragedy, that sent Lizzie into a spiral of depression. Often she was seen wandering alone in the vineyards, sometimes staying out there till late at night. Other times she would sit alone in the darkness of this barn, by vat number 19. One day she couldn't take it any longer, so she walked into the barn and swallowed poison, ending her life. To this day, her pale apparition is sometimes seen near that same spot. Other times, people walk into the barn and feel intense cold spots. Psychics who have visited this place pick up a sensation or perception of intense sadness and remorse and a longing for forgiveness. It's fascinating to me that after 130 years, this ghost still wanders this winery here in the Upper Napa Valley.
Ellen McFarlane and Devin Sisk are the creators of Napa Ghosts and Legends, an interactive paranormal tour in downtown Napa. While Devin leads us through some of Napa's dark history, he offers the opportunity for guests to use some of his tools of the trade. These tools may help to detect light anomalies and disembodied voices to full-bodied apparitions as he guides us through a den of iniquity, a castle, and an opera house with a phantom practical joker. In Napa's center stands its historic courthouse, or maybe I should say its third historic courthouse. The first was too small, the second poorly built, but in 1879, the third courthouse was built to last. Originally, it had a bell tower resembling a Russian onion dome, but it was removed after suffering earthquake damage. Ellen McFarlane became aware of her psychic powers as a child when she first saw shadow figures and, at age 11, the terrifying apparition of a suicide victim. She tells me that at any given time, there are 6 to 7 ghosts around the courthouse. One of them is believed to be the spirit of the man who murdered poor Lucina Greenwood. He was subsequently hanged there in 1897 in California's last public execution.
We're standing in the area where the portable gallows was once erected in Napa, California. The last execution was by the Napa citizens of Billy Rowe. He was a serial killer that murdered Lucina Greenwood here in Napa. Billy Rowe was kept in a cell in the middle part of the building because that was the jail back in the day. And what they would do is they would bring prisoners across into the courtroom and they would have their trials and they would be convicted. Now, people in the courthouse still see the ghost of Billy Rowe. They see him trying to escape. Someone was supposed to put a gun in his cell so that he could shoot his way out and escape, and that didn't happen. So he still roams the halls of the courthouse. Downtown Napa became kind of a carnival atmosphere. About 2,000 people came down to witness this execution. They then put the gallows up into the attic and completely forgot about them for about 40 years or so. Imagine their surprise when they were cleaning out the attic about 40 years later and they found a big wood thing with metal on it. They brought it outside and they wondered, what is this thing? And they realized this was the portable gallows that they had put up in the attic. Now, the gallows is still in existence. It's one of the only 2 gallows surviving in California of its type, and we have it in our Sheriff's Department museum. It definitely has a ghostly presence about it. You can definitely feel a spirit energy about it, and you can visit it anytime at the Sheriff's office. The historic courthouse is also the site of a murder-suicide that occurred in the 1800s. Our founding father, Nathan Coombs, had a brother named Fred Coombs, who did not necessarily want to be divorced from his wife. And one day, as they were exiting their divorce trial, as they were coming out, he asked her if she would walk with him. And she said, "I think the time for reconciliation has long passed." At about that point, he drew a pistol and he shot her twice in the chest. He then went back into the courtroom, put the gun to his head, and killed himself in the courtroom. Now, his spirit is known to rattle the doors. He has made cold spots. He has thrown rocks off the steps of the court when we've conducted our ghost tours. And he is a very volatile man. He has also appeared as a shadow figure in one of the top windows of the building. He is frequently around this area. So we're at the location where Dr. Hennessy brought the corpse of Billy Rowe after it was dissected in San Francisco. They brought it to this building. It was originally a D.S. Kaiser's mortuary. Now, they needed a place to dry out the skeleton because Dr. Hennessy wanted to hang the skeleton in the Napa High School as a teaching skeleton. And as I said before, this was a very personal execution. So they kind of used it as payback for him. They put the body of Billy Rowe up on the building, and they left him up there to dry out for about a year. And after about a year, there is a little blurb in the newspaper that says something like, "By the way, the body of Billy Rowe has been drying out on D.S. Kaiser's mortuary for the last year." Cole's Chop House, which is what it is now, is also very haunted. They have radios that go out. They've had sightings. So we think that Billy frequents this area as well as the courthouse. There's a dark energy all through the town. For instance, the Migliavacca house. Migliavacca Mansion is located over on 4th Street, and it used to be located in downtown Napa where the library is now. It was owned by the Migliavacca family, who were merchants. They were also the creators of the Bank of Italy, which became the Bank of America. One of the scariest stories that I had heard was that of a nanny up in the ballroom. And one day I went in for a doctor's appointment, and when I was sitting in the doctor's appointment, I saw the nanny appear behind the doctor, hanging as she had when she committed suicide. It was a very, very scary moment for an 11-year-old child. Very, very terrifying. She often appears up in the window. We've caught film of her up in the window, and she's been seen by many a local Napan walking past a house on a dark night. Another house that was very haunted was the Noyes Mansion. It's now home to Wine Spectator magazine and is a business. That was one of my first investigations that I ever did, and one of the greatest things about that house is that it has a basement that had almost like a vortex feel to it. So when you walked into the basement to the bottom, you felt like you were going into quicksand or into a very heavy atmosphere. It was that point we caught light anomalies, we caught sounds, figures out of the corner of our eyes, and the house itself just seemed to scream that it was still alive, even though it was, at that time, was abandoned and not kept up in any way. It would be interesting actually to go back now and see what it's like now that they fixed it up. Napa is a location with very many haunted houses in it. It is a very haunted city. It invokes a deep feeling of darkness after hours.
Some of the most important instruments that we use in the paranormal field are K2 meters, trifield meters, and Mel meters. That's to measure the energy of a spirit or spirit activity. We also use many different cameras, from full spectrum cameras to infrared cameras. We also use dowsing rods for spiritual communication, having the spirits cross the rods for yes and push the rods out for no. We are downstairs in the basement of what is now Carpe Diem restaurant in downtown Napa. This place used to be the Alexandria Hotel. And when it was the Alexandria Hotel, it was a brothel, a saloon, and there was a lot of gambling going on as well. So men would come here, they would hire women, They'd also gamble and drink. With these three factors, there was a lot of room for violence. This place also has what we consider a body drop. There is one little grate that opens up and leads right into the Napa River. So if you wanted to get rid of a body, all you had to do was drop a body into that spot and it would float out to the middle of the Napa River. Now, some of the things that go on in this building, there's said to be 5 different spirits that we've contacted. There's 3 women who used to work in this brothel who met very violent demise. They've been seen as shadow beings. They've also been known to mess with some of the male waiters by grabbing their apron strings and pulling them. They've also been known to grab glasses off the bar and drop them onto the ground. Now, there's also 2 males. One male is down here in this area, which we believe was also the gambling area. Now, some of the activity that people get down here is they hear a man saying, "Get out." They will also hear the ripping of cards as if somebody is shuffling. We are standing at the grate, which we believe was the body dump. Now, it was said during Prohibition that they would also dump the booze here during raids. And during the gambling days and brothel days, if somebody didn't pay their bill or they were caught cheating, into the dump they would go. Now, this is a very interesting factor because in the paranormal field, we believe that water is a great conductor for spirit activity. So it's believed that anything that happens on the Napa River can be connected to this, and they could actually come out here. At Castillo de la Amorosa in Calistoga, there's several different spirits that haunt this location. Now, what's interesting is the spirits came over with the stones from many different buildings of antiquity, old churches, mausoleums, and even old castles. The castle was only built within 10 years, but it's incredibly haunted. Now, after doing investigations there, we found that some of the most prevalent spirits is one lady who's from Spain. Her name is Lady Sepulveda. And she doesn't like to talk to peasant folk like us. She only likes to talk to people of royalty. Now, there's also a plague victim from the 16th century. She's often seen in the corridors, and she manifests by showing herself as a bloody plague victim or a burn victim. People have experienced burning sensations on their back and on their arms. There is also a chapel. The chapel is very beautiful and it has a confessional that is over 200 years old. With the full turrets of this castle and the moat and the lake in the back, and with the incredible mazes that are set up down below, it is very difficult to navigate your way through, especially in this haunted location. Even though this castle was built in the 90s, it is still incredibly haunted with the spirits of the past. The old Opera House in downtown Napa is another historically significant location, and very haunted. Many great performers over the past have performed there, such as Jack London from 1905 to 1907. Some of the other performers, such as Miss Annabelle, still haunt this building today. Annabelle was married to an old riverboat gambler. When I say old, he was about 45 years old. Annabelle was 21. And they used to grift up and down the Napa River, through Benicia, and up again through the Sacramento Delta. She would flirt with one of the other gamblers and give signals to her husband. And obviously, he won quite a bit. She finally got very tired of being on the riverboat and being with this man and decided to set her roots in Napa. She started performing at the Opera House. The dramatics of the Opera House, she soon fell in love with a stagehand. The old hotel next to the Opera House is where she resided. One day, her husband got off the riverboat, went to the hotel, and found these two lovers together. He then put 3 bullets in her chest, 2 in her lover's chest, and then walked to the stairway where he put the gun in his mouth and ended his life. Now, both these figures have been seen in both buildings. The lovers are still in the hotel. Annabelle still frequents the Opera House and has been known to play practical jokes on some of the male waiters at the restaurant there. One of the more famous incidents is when a manager was getting off duty. He got into the elevator. He then took a 45-minute ride in the elevator, going up and down and stopping at every floor at different intervals. Now, the crazy thing is when the elevator people came in to work on the elevator, they found nothing wrong with the elevator. She's also been known to turn on and off lights. There was another incident where they were doing a special event in the old Opera House, and one of the waiters and busboys were making a joke about Miss Annabelle. She didn't think this was very funny. They put a candle up on the stage, up on a table, and they were joking, saying, "Miss Annabelle, please light the candle." Well, as they were finishing up clearing the table away from the event that was there, they turned around to the stage, and there was a single candle lit. It's been our experience that buildings over a century old, and especially theaters, are incredibly haunted. The energy from the actors and performers are still constantly on stage, and sometimes they still perform on stage. Napa wasn't always the wine mecca that it is today. Because of its dark, rich history and some of its darker past, some of the spirits remain in a lot of the buildings. This adds to the incredible hauntings that happen in downtown Napa.
Certain people or events are so strong they leave behind what's called an impression. A battlefield is a perfect example. Decades later, people may report hearing shouts and explosions and seeing the images of uniformed soldiers. Those soldiers are not ghosts haunting the field, but rather the impressions of these intense, long-ago events. Impressions are different from ghosts or a haunting, as Carla Heine will tell us, and she ought to know. She grew up in a haunted house and has seen and experienced ghostly phenomena from her earliest memory. She takes us into the heart of darkness and back into the light. And along the way, she introduces us to some of the newest trends in spirit photography.
I'm standing behind the Blue Wing Inn, one of the oldest adobes in all of California. During the gold rush, it was frequented by many, many men because in Sonoma, we had the best of the bad. And we had the best liquor, the best food, the best music, the best gambling, and the prettiest prostitutes. There was also, in this area, there was a little Chinese tent city, and we have a number of ghosts in this building who are still left from those days of the Wild West. One of the most interesting things about Sonoma was that people could come here with all kinds of dangerous backgrounds and enjoy themselves without being arrested. There was a pirate ship that came in, and the captain of the ship stayed right here in the Blue Wing Inn, over here to my left. He was such a strong personality that he left an impression on the space, which is why he's been seen over and over again. Also, an interesting thing about him is that he's seen walking 6 inches above the floor. This used to puzzle me until I was told that during the 1906 earthquake, the whole building settled by 6 inches. So he's actually, in fact, he and his dog are actually haunting the original floor. After the 1906 earthquake, the building did settle, but it was still in excellent condition. And during the 1880s, the Victorians came in by train and chased out most of the wild men and the prostitutes. So this building was pretty much abandoned for a while. Up here, there was a little apartment, and the last of the prostitutes in the building lived there. And she became very unhappy because the pressure on her to leave was very strong. And she was getting older, so she could no longer ply her trade. And she became so unhappy that one day she jumped off this balcony and died as she fell onto the bricks. She left a really strong impression right there along the rail where she jumped off. And I've been around when many people have stood there and said, "Oh my God, I feel dizzy, I think I'm gonna fall." And you have to get them away from that because it kind of takes them over. And I think that's an impression that she left there. She also occupies that room so strongly, but she's not just an impression ghost, she's an actual spirit living there. People who have come here have visited the room, but it hasn't been a room that we could rent out for very long. The building was occupied by my godmother from 1948 forward, so I got a kind of an inside track on who spent the night there and how their experience was. This building has a lot of active ghosts, a lot of impression ghosts where it's just, an echo from the past, but she is a very strong ghost, and she has made it impossible for anyone to rent that little apartment up there. Almost all the glass in the Blue Wing Inn was hand rolled, and it's the original glass that was put in for the building. One of the most exciting things about the new trend in spirit photography or paranormal photography is that people have been taking pictures through old glass and bringing up images that are caught in the glass, sometimes 100-year-old images, sometimes 50-year-old images. And this has to do with the physics of glass. This glass has moved since it was first put into these frames. And Bodie, Virginia City, Sacramento, right here in California, they are finding these old images, people in costumes. It's a very exciting aspect of paranormal photography. We're at the Sonoma Developmental Center in Sonoma Valley, and this was previously the Sonoma State Hospital, and sometime before that it was the Sonoma Asylum for the Feeble-Minded. It's had a long history. In fact, the property itself has had a long history, and when people first came to the valley, the Indians warned them, do not build around this area. They said that this is a place where the bad spirits come out of the ground, especially the spirit of the serpent. And even despite this warning, no, they built right on top of this area, and that was where they built the asylum at Sonoma. I learned the history of this building from my next door neighbor, Dr. Taylor. He was a dentist here on the property, and he told me about the Philadelphia experiment. He said that 45 survivors from the Philadelphia experiment had been housed in this building directly behind me. He said that they had been part of a skeleton crew on the battleship Eldridge. The battleship Eldridge disappeared in the middle of the afternoon in Philadelphia Harbor.
Generators activated, sir. For 41 years, the government denied it ever happened.
I don't believe this.
The Eldridge has vanished.
Of course she has. She's radar invisible.
No, sir. She's really vanished.
But one ship did disappear.
You're telling me this is my imagination? You think the Navy knows what they're doing? You saw the guys on the boat. This wasn't supposed to happen, Jimmy.
When it reappeared, some of its 600 crew members were gone. Some of them were completely insane, some of them were dead, and some of them were caught between the bulwark and the free air. So they were actually encased inside the metal of the ship itself. There were 45 men who survived that day, and they were brought by bus to Mare Island and then brought here to the Sonoma Asylum for the Feeble-Minded. But it only took them 34 days to die off. There were very few men who managed to live longer than that. After they died, their ghosts, their images, were seen regularly inside this building. They tried to use the building to rehouse the people that they'd vacated, but they couldn't stand it. It was worse than ever. People saw the sailors walking in and out of the walls. Even though they tried to use the building just for records from the 1935 back records. They would send in a girl to get the records, and she would come out completely disoriented and upset. They tried to send them in 2 by 2. They would still, again, come back without the records, very upset, and finally they just had to move the records to the main administration building. People have seen ghosts of women climbing out of the basement windows, trying to get out of the laundry room. They've also recorded orbs. They've taken lots of pictures of orbs, all different sizes, all different shapes. People have seen a ghost of a little boy looking out a window on the other side. And at first I thought I saw it, but then I thought, nah, but they saw it and they were adamant about it, even like 3 days later. I've been here with 2 major paranormal groups, and they came here with Geiger counters, with electromagnetic field resonance machines. They came here with recordings to get EVPs, and some of the results were startling. The Geiger counter recorded a 4.5 measurement on the building itself. I think that the reason that this building has been completely unusable is that the gentlemen who were exposed to the radiation from the Philadelphia experiment absorbed 6 times the amount of radiation that would be fatal for a human being. I believe this radiation was transferred from their bodies to the space that they occupied, to the walls of this building, and I think that's what makes it so susceptible to paranormal activity, but also so completely unusable for normal applications. I've been inside the building. I began to feel short of breath. I began to feel like the ceiling was coming down on me and I had to get out. I did not last more than 30 seconds inside this building. This is the only place at Eldridge where I feel really relaxed and happy. This is the carousel, the place where people, parents, brothers, sisters, children would bring residents to play, to ride the carousel, to have a little picnic, and to be happy. Happiness can leave a residual energy, just like sadness, but here, the happiness has had an unusual effect on the space around the carousel. This contraption has been known to start itself and stop itself when no one is touching the controls. For half a century, the maintenance crew has inspected every aspect of the mechanics and the electro connections here. Nobody knows why. It just does turn itself on and off all by itself. In my travels around Sonoma Valley, I've been invited to visit lots of houses, just like this one. Old houses that have been empty for years and years, but that contain a lot of human history. Many of these houses have experienced violence, violent feelings, passion, unhappiness, great joy, and some of them leave a residual feeling in them. Others are inhabited by the very souls that once lived there, so happily or so sadly. The first thing I would do with a house like this is find out its history, from the day they put up the first boards to the present. I'd find out what went on there to help me understand what's going on there now.
Historian Evan Atwood paints a vivid picture of the variety of paranormal activity you might expect to encounter in older buildings and some of the reasons that spirits may linger. In Petaluma, he takes us to an old silk mill and to the hacienda of General Mariano Vallejo, an important military commander and politician who helped shape the transition of California from a territory of Mexico to the U.S. state of California.
The word ghost immediately brings to mind visions of ancient European castles, foggy moors, dark dungeons, and dilapidated catacombs. Elements of these can still be found in many modern American cities. A countless number of spirits remain in old hotels, restaurants, and homes. Visitors and residents often see or sense many of these lost souls. Many harbor resentment, pain, a sense of loss, or a desire to complete unfinished business, still roaming the dark halls of these mansions and theaters. Many appear as partial apparitions, confused about their transition from life to death. Paranormal activity is often bizarre, confusing, and dangerous to witness. Strange sounds may be heard, tapping on walls or ceilings, heavy footsteps, shattered glass. Objects may move about on tables or floors, flying across the room. Furniture may spin or tip over completely. Commonly reported sounds are greetings, warnings, screams and sobs, light switches turning on and off, windows moving, and doors pushed open or closed. Many ghosts have the strength to throw objects, pull pictures from off the wall, or move heavy items. Many linger in houses, cemeteries, factories, and stores, waiting for someone, perhaps a familiar face, to help them come to terms with their new existence. On the east side of Petaluma, General Vallejo's huge hacienda stands on a hillside surrounded by fields that were once a part of his huge empire. It stands serene, slowly decaying at the turn of the 2nd century. It appears abandoned, with the exception of the occasional grazing goat or hawk soaring overhead. It has the definite look and feel of a place of ghostly activity. Some visitors have mentioned seeing and hearing strange things on the 2nd floor of the hacienda. Ghost hunters have detected a disembodied sound of heavy boots striking the redwood planks on the wide verandas. A ghostly image has been seen sitting on the bench outside General Vallejo's own apartment. The apparition of a Mexican soldier has been seen, visible only from the waist up, traveling around the barracks on dark, cold nights. Cold chills, the sensation of being touched, strange orbs, faint voices, or the feeling of being watched have been reported. Sounds such as metal scraping metal have been heard outside of buildings. There have been reports of ghosts visible on the main grounds at the entry. The silhouettes of soldiers on the 2nd floor of the hacienda as if they were still on guard. Many night watchmen and spectators have eyewitness reports of these events. The Carlson Courier Company bought property here from John McNear in 1892 and built the Petaluma Silk Mill, the only silk mill of its kind at the time. Today, it stands as the only Georgian colonial revival-style industrial building in the North Bay area. The silk for the Petaluma Mill was purchased from China. The mill had the capacity of manufacturing in a thread 250 pounds of raw silk per day. Sunset Line and Twine bought the company in 1940 for the manufacturing of fishing line and related nylon twines, but operations ended in 2006, and the building has stood vacant ever since. It's now on its way to its latest incarnation, a 76-room hotel. Several stories have been told of supernatural phenomenon in the area. Ghost hunters have photographed what they describe as orbs of light floating in and around the old work areas. Often, visitors report hearing distant sounds like the tolling of a bell. People have seen pale, transparent images walking the hallways, climbing stairs, or sitting in chairs. Ghosts can create changes in the physical qualities of the environment, and ice-cold breezes and unexplained gusts of wind are often present. One dark night, an observer outside of the building described what they saw as a light flickering from window to window along the entire length of the building, as though a light or candle were hovering, until it finally disappeared. Oftentimes, temperature changes are accompanied by the feeling as though the atmosphere has thickened, as though the room were filled by unseen people. In old buildings such as this, such strange occurrences are quite common.
Doug Carnahan is the founder and president of NorCal Paranormal Investigators, NPI for short. He recounts what happened when he and his team of investigators brought their equipment to Petaluma's Phoenix Theater. He also explores a restaurant that was once an 1850s roadhouse and stagecoach stop where the ghosts of weary travelers still come and go. In nearby Healdsburg are some of the most beautiful mansions and inns in wine country, with large, shady verandas, gabled roofs, and beautiful millwork. Gazing out the window of some of these Queen Anne's at acres of vineyards can send visitors straight back to the 1800s. As NPI team investigator Tammy Benjamin tells us, for some visitors, the experience is all too real.
Many towns and cities have formal burial grounds that are located normally within a mile or so of town center. Over the course of several decades, the town or city grew in ways not anticipated. Graves were opened, caskets and headstones removed, and the dead reburied elsewhere. When relatives could not be found, headstones and markers on some graves were simply disposed of, the casket left in place. Eventually, over time, homes and businesses have been built over these burial sites. These places are known for weird activity. Virtually hidden from view, a former graveyard sits near the corner of East and Matheson Street in front of the St. John's Catholic Church. People that work and reside around these areas still to this day experience strange happenings. In one of the local mansions, it is rumored that the former owner watches over the home and the furnishings. She walks from room to room, making certain that everything is in place and that it reflects the charm and the beauty of when she moved in over 100 years ago. She moves about quietly and often unnoticed, except for the soft swishing of her long Victorian-style dress. On a wide veranda, the partial apparition of a man is seen. He is thought to have been a ranch foreman, short with dark hair and a mustache. On occasion, he is seen wearing a leather apron and heavy boots. Heavy footsteps are heard on the veranda at the west side of the house. Here at the Hillsburg Baseball Park, there is an urban legend. There was a gentleman who was distraught over the loss of his wife, the job, and bankruptcy. He is known to have hung himself up in the tree. And to this day, when you walk by, you can see him swaying from the branch to and fro. When I was a young girl, I was walking home. It was a full moon, and I saw the man hanging from the tree, swaying back and forth.
The Phoenix Theater in Petaluma, California, opened up in 1905 and was at that time known as the Hill Opera House. My team and I were lucky enough to get in there to investigate and to see just exactly what type of activities we could find. There was 6 of us in the team, and we spread out all over the whole area, from the attic all the way to the basement. One of the activities that we noticed was up on stage. We believe there's a spirit of a little boy up there as well, and of what we call the big guy, the big man, is up on stage, shadow figure. A shadow figure simply is identified with the black outline of, it looks like your shadow, up against the wall in the middle of a room. It could be anywhere, but it's a black outline of a figure. So during our investigation that night, one of my paranormal investigators, she was observing what appeared to be a young man up on the stage. And as she was peering off to him and looking, she was thinking to herself, why is there a little boy up here? So as she was watching him, all of a sudden he ducks down and away, hiding behind speakers. Later on during the evening, she approached the manager there, Tom Gaffey, and said, Tom, why is there a little child in here? He goes, that's not a little child, that's the spirit. He likes to play games up there and hide behind those speakers. Back in 1859, the Washoe House was established as a roadhouse. It went from that to a stagecoach stop, to a hotel, and today it's now even a restaurant. The Battle of the Washoe House is a very interesting story, where back in the day, the Petaluma Southerners and the Northern from the Santa Rosa area met guns in hand here at the Washoe House in order to battle each other. They ended up in the bar, drinking together, and walked away as friends. The history here at the Washoe House has been long-winded as far as paranormal activity is concerned. Many years there has been activities that people that have worked here and have also stayed here has experienced. Anything from voices in the night to seeing full-bodied apparitions in different locations. The dining room area has been especially active in paranormal activity. People have been feeling cold spots in that area, seeing apparitions, and also hearing voices. I believe a lot of the activity here happens to be transit spirits or possibly spirits from way back in the day that have just decided that this is a place that they want to be. Or there's been a couple suicides here as well. So let's go down to the dining area now, and I'll tell you what we experienced there. We're here now in the downstairs dining area, which is considered to be one of the most active areas in the Washoe House. When we were in here investigating, we discovered K2 hits and lots of other activities that brought us directly down here to investigate. It was 3 o'clock in the morning when we finished up our investigation, and we ended up outside. One of my investigators wanted to take the exterior photographs of the location for his own memory's sake. And the next day, this is what he found. Keeping in mind that the building was totally empty when we left, as you can clearly see in this photograph, there was somebody sitting in the building looking out the window at us. If you happen to be in the Petaluma area, come on by the Washoe House. Come on in, have a meal, sit at the bar, have a drink. You never know what you might experience here.
As a Hollywood historian, there are certain pieces of memorabilia that can literally make me drool. And as an expert on Hollywood's ghosts, I believe that these objects hold the energy of their owners. It's the reason you're never supposed to remove anything from sacred burial grounds and pharaohs' tombs. Hello, the curse of the mummy? Hollywood has depicted this legend for decades on film, and in some cases, firsthand. The master of horror, Lon Chaney, triumphed as the Phantom of the Opera in 1925. The sets for the Paris Opera House were so enormous that Universal Studios built an even bigger soundstage to house them, Stage 28. It stood literally as a monument to Chaney's cinematic achievements. For years after his death, electricians, carpenters, guards, and all sorts of studio employees reported lights turning on and off in the middle of the night, doors opening and closing, and a man in a dark cape running on the catwalks. Old Hollywood is still alive at Georgetown in Sebastopol, where treasured objects from filmland's past are lovingly cared for by Guy Smith. In a western town evocative of a studio backlot, he keeps the ghost of Movieland's glory days alive.
We're here in my backyard. This is kind of an unusual place, and as you're going to end up discovering. This automobile that I'm next to was part of my father's life when he was very young. He grew up in early Hollywood in the 1930s when people were doing movies just because that's how they earned a living then. He didn't think it was something as special as it became in later time. This car was bought new by Clarence Brown, who was a major producer and director with MGM Studios. He and my father were very close friends, so close that after World War II, my father served his time in the South Pacific in the Marine Corps. He came home and Clarence Brown gave this Rolls Royce to my father. We're fortunate that it's been in the family all these years. And when I look at this car, I don't just think of it as the kind of car it is, so much as what it represents. It represents old Hollywood and a man that was very involved with it. And I'm very proud of my father's involvement. This is Georgetown. This was my father's dream. When he left Hollywood, he thought that would be the end of it. But that wasn't true. He had to have storage for the artifacts that he saved. And next thing he knew, he was building a western town. Gave it all the character that it has. It's a complete town. It has interiors, not just exteriors like the flats that you would normally see on a movie set. And these artifacts are part of the people that were in Hollywood. And you can't help it, but when you're out here, especially late at night, that you sense some of Hollywood. And growing up the way I did, around old movie stars, they're real people. And their memories are still here. This is the actual carriage that Clark Gable drove in Gone with the Wind. We're really happy to still have it here in the collection, and when I'm near it, I feel like I'm near Clark Gable. The cast and the crew never could have imagined that their efforts in shooting Gone with the Wind would be a product that would last into the future. That those images would be shot up into satellites and then be played throughout the world. As I'm standing here, I'm sure somewhere is watching Gone with the Wind and seeing this carriage. And when I stand next to it, I feel the spirit of that product. And I also feel like I'm very close to Clark Gable. I was fortunate when I was young, because of my father's involvement, I was able to go to his ranch in Encino. I was too young to recognize him as a movie star, but I knew one thing: he had a beautiful ranch. This simple little car has probably more Hollywood history than any of our automobiles. This Model A Woody was used in a movie called The Miracle Rider. It's actually a serial with Tom Mix. My father used to talk about Mr. Mix an awful lot, and I've always had an affinity to him because he was a car guy like I am. And unfortunately, he lost his life in the late 1930s in a Accord automobile. He was a fantastic cowboy and one of the early ones in Hollywood. These tattered old cages have a story to them, a piece of history that is a motion picture that most people in Sonoma County are proud of. The Master of Suspense, Alfred Hitchcock, shot The Birds in Bodega. My father's cousin was up from Southern California working on the film, and because of their relationship, my father visited the set many times. Well, there were chickens that were imported from Asia that had to be dressed up as seagulls and crows. At the end of the shoot, they didn't know what to do with these 60-odd chickens, so they ended up here at Georgetown. We had some of the most unusual chickens running around this ranch for months. Part of the deal was we weren't allowed to butcher any of them for at least 2 months in case they had to come back for a retake. It's a fascinating feeling to, in the evening, watch an old movie, a movie that was shot in the 1930s, especially a very famous movie, and be able to walk out here and look at what my father was able to preserve. The carriage Clark Gable drove in Gone with the Wind. In fact, my father was in Gone with the Wind. He played a soldier, actually 2 different soldiers. He was both North and the South. That's movie making. Also, there's artifacts from a number of movies out here. In fact, more movies than I could probably remember just standing here. Enough to where old Hollywood is in my veins. And there's times when I come out here late in the evening and I'll feel the stillness in the air, the quietness, and then I'll feel the chill of a cool breeze going past me. And it's Hollywood and their memories being part of me.
Historians Frank Aylesworth and Daniel Sullivan chronicle the colorful history of several coastal towns with their ancient redwoods and miles of untouched ocean bluff coastline. But these romantic destinations were not always scenic retreats. On the contrary, the suffering and the hardship of the early days still weighs heavily on the souls who passed through here. Some of those first settlers were Russians. Their connection to the region dates back more than 200 years, and though they had all left by 1841, they are still seen and heard on the California coast.
Fort Ross was established in 1812 when the Russian-American Fur Company purchased 1,000 acres of coastal land. They built a fort containing 59 buildings, including a Russian Orthodox chapel. 2 corner blockhouses were outfitted with cannons to repel both the Spanish and local Native Americans who did not like the presence of the outpost here. For 3 decades, the Russian settlements supported fur posts in Alaska. By the end of the 1840s, Russian commercial activities in Alaska had grown less dependent on Fort Ross. Wishing to avoid a conflict with Mexico and the increasing number of Americans in California, the Russians withdrew after selling cannons and farming implements to Captain John Sutter. Sutter then purchased the fort for $30,000 in 1841. He cannibalized the fort to provide supplies for his colony in the Sacramento Valley. 7 years later, the California Gold Rush began. Visitors to the fort have reported seeing apparitions in the barracks and in the internment center, hearing sounds of footsteps echoing up and down the halls as if someone were pacing back and forth, reported feeling a sense of presence, a shadow or a shift in the light, sounds of men speaking in an unrecognizable language. Many have reported hearing the distinct sound of a hammer striking another metal object, such as an anvil, the common sounds of work and day-to-day activity in the once active fort. Ghost hunters using dowsing rods have discovered many hot spots throughout the fort. Most disturbingly, they have detected a line running from the fort's gate to the edge of the cliff. This line has been described as a channel of fear. When the Russians left Fort Ross to sail back to Alaska, they left the Aleutian Island natives they brought with them as workers behind. This channel of fear may have been created when the Aleutians ran from the fort to the cliffs to see the last boats sailing to Alaska, stranding them in a strange land. It is rumored they may have been thrown from the promontory overlooking the cove by the local Native Americans. Here, just south of the fort, is an historic cemetery with wooden crosses. Many early Fort Ross residents are buried here, and no doubt they could all tell tales of death, disease, suffering, and hardships. I believe their spirits still haunt this area to this day. Jenner is a small coastal village in Sonoma County, where the Russian River meets the Pacific Ocean. Population, 136. It was founded in the mid-1800s by Captain William Jenner. A local lumber mill used to run 24 hours a day to supply materials to rebuild the city of San Francisco after the devastating earthquake of 1906. Each spring, the competition between the ocean waves and the river's flow creates the Russian River estuary. home of harbor seals, brown pelicans, blue herons, and other wildlife. In 1979, Richard Murphy got the idea of restoring 5 district homes scattered throughout the valley and uniting them to create the unique lodging destination, the historic Jenner Inn. By bringing these century-old structures together and breathing new life into them, Murphy may have encouraged the ghosts they harbor to become more active. Guests and staff members have spotted the apparition of an elderly, gray-haired woman wearing a knit cap in the doorway of the Mill College cottage. She appears with a confused look on her face and then vanishes. At the Jenner house, the apparition of a man dressed in a gray suit, sporting mutton chop sideburns, appears. He stands looking over his surroundings as if he's inspecting new additions to the inn. This ghost appears so lifelike that he's been mistaken for a handyman there to do some work at the house. But he may be the ghost of Captain William Jenner himself. In the treehouse cottage, the ghost of 2 dancers appear. They dance about the room wildly and then simply disappear. Disembodied footfalls of dancers have been heard too. This is probably a remnant from the days when the inn was the site of wild parties during Prohibition. The sound of children laughing has been heard both inside and outside each of the buildings at various times during the daylight hours. The overpowering odor of liquor was detected one night when Roaring Twenties reenactors were at the Jenner Inn. Now, ghost hunters have speculated that the costumes the reenactors wore may have triggered memories of a time when smuggling liquor was common on this desolate coast. Jenner's century-old, rich history is quite conducive to ghostly phenomena.
The town of Mendocino was founded in 1850 as a logging community, originally called Meigsville after Henry Meigs, a railroad and lumber entrepreneur. Many of the town's original settlers were New Englanders, as was common with many Northern California logging towns. Portuguese fishermen settled in the area, as did immigrants from China who built a Taoist temple in town. Amid a dramatic landscape nestles the downtown, with Victorian homes in Easter egg colors, and the main street lined with numerous shops, a museum, and eateries. The flowers and scrub of Mendocino Headland State Park blanket the edges of the town. Small trails lead down to secluded beaches, and benches offer a viewing into passing whales or surf-riding sea lions. The TV series Murder, She Wrote had the largest impact on the community. 9 episodes of the 264-episode program were filmed in Mendocino, while exterior shots throughout Mendocino were used in the remaining episodes. And the village is rich with ghost stories. Ghost ships have long since sparked fascination and fear with mariners and non-mariners alike. Spooky vessels that run the gamut, from phantom ships that appear as eerie apparitions to real-life abandoned wrecks. Mendocino Bay has experienced phantom ships as well. Visitors to this area have awakened in the morning and spotted 2 or 3 masked sailing vessels anchored in the bay. They appear to be from long ago and not modern-day ships. Then, to their surprise, the ships vanish before their eyes. It was reported that film crew members shooting an episode of Murder, She Wrote in 1985 saw phantom ships, clear as day, and then simply faded away. The Mendocino Hotel and Garden Suites originally opened in 1878 under the title of the Temperance House. Its reputation not always as pristine as it is today, as it was a bordello for several years. Now the hotel reports that a Victorian woman haunts tables 6 and 8 in the restaurant. She has been seen in guest rooms and is said to be playful with the housekeepers as well. Dressed in a beautiful long gown with long blonde hair, she sometimes appears in a large mirror in the dining room, causing dinners to take pause and look around, assuming she might be a hostess or a reenactor of Mendocino's pioneer period. In room 307, 2 guests have reported seeing an apparition of a man's face surrounded by mist in the mirror. The face remains visible for several minutes and then vanished. In room 10, a ghost likes to stretch out on one of the beds soon after the maids have finished making it. A firm indentation has often been seen, shaped like the body of a tall man. Other paranormal phenomena are often encountered in several other locations in the hotel. Doors move, floorbeds creak, and the sounds of heavy boots are heard. Several sightings have been reported of fishermen, loggers, and sailors sitting at the bar, on the stairwell, or in the lobby. Some believe it's a ghost, some believe it is just part of the charm in staying in a building that is 150 years old. The Point Cabrillo Lighthouse began operations in 1908. The demand for lumber meant that maritime commerce was at an all-time high, and a lighthouse was critical for the safety of their ships and their precious cargo. The lighthouse sits near downtown Mendocino on a little peninsula. Its 39 acres offers spectacular views of the Pacific Ocean, passing whales and sunsets. As with most every lighthouse on California's coast, they have their ghost stories or a ghostly atmosphere that attracts the interests of paranormal enthusiasts. Some strange happenings have been reported here on the tours. People being touched by unseen hands and feelings of a presence. Caretakers report items being moved in the middle of the night while they are asleep. A rocking chair moving back and forth on its own, or sea boots trudging up the stairway. This especially happens during the winter storms. Household cats have acted strangely during times of this ghostly activity. On occasion, routed by windblown fog or thick layers of marine air, the place definitely has a ghostly atmosphere. While the lighthouse is said to be haunted, no one is sure why or by whom. With all the maritime disasters that have occurred around the Point Cabrillo Lighthouse, it would not be out of the realm to assume that one or two sailors may still haunt the lighthouse today. The Mendocino Presbyterian Church was built originally in 1859. Services were first held in a large tent until a crude wooden structure could be built for more comfortable services on cold, foggy Sunday mornings. By 1865, church members decided a more permanent structure was needed and constructed this architectural gem. Its English Gothic steeple and peaked roof are typical of many Carpenter Gothic churches. The building was renovated in 1966 and again in 1987 and houses a classroom and offices. Standing alone in this historic church, people have heard auditory phenomenon that may in fact be hauntings. Sounds of a male voice can be heard bursting 2 or 4 words at a time emanating from the pulpit. It echoes off the walls and high ceilings. Ghost hunters have spotted and reported strange sensations on the steps leading to the main door of the church. The rush of unseen beings has been detected as if several people were leaving the church in a hurry.
Graveyards all over the country, whether they are old or not so old, always give us that creepy feeling that spirits are around. Some of it has to do with long shadows cast by tall tombstones, broken headstones, and other impressive monuments that make us feel that spirits are still roaming about, wanting us to pay attention to them. At cemeteries such as Tuluke here in Napa, there's a tremendous amount of paranormal activity that may be discovered by visitors. Much of it is not ghostly, however. Much of what we find in cemeteries are called imprints. These are emotions laid down on the environment by visitors, usually grieving family members, who visit periodically year after year after year and leave imprints of their emotions. These are paranormal, and they may be detected by a variety of devices, but they're not ghostly. The ghosts we find in cemetery might be someone who occupies a grave. They tend to show up if the grave's been vandalized, the headstone's been damaged by weather events, or if the deceased is placed in the wrong grave with the wrong head marker. Very often we find the spirits of caretakers, grave diggers. These are people who worked in the cemeteries for years, sometimes decades, and although they died elsewhere, returned to carry on their duties. We look for them carrying the tools of their trade, such as a shovel or a pick, and very often they appear as a partial apparition. From the waist up, we see the shoulders, arms, head, sometimes wearing a hat. They pay no attention to us, but they carry on their duties. Paranormal investigators often search for these ghosts by listening for the sound of a shovel turning the earth. In researching and writing my Ghost Hunters series of books, I've been able to travel all over the United States and visit haunted graveyards, jails, asylums, battlefields, private homes, and public institutions. I've found ghosts virtually everywhere I go, and it's developed in me a fascination for the lives of people who lived greatly and died and left behind a spiritual legacy for all of us to follow.
I hope you enjoyed your tour of haunted wine country. The area's diverse and often surprising past sets the stage for some rather unique hauntings. Come visit and walk in the footsteps of history. Just be aware, history may be walking shoulder to shoulder with you to a long life.